Thank you, Rabbi Bashevkin, for joining us. For the first question, in your book Synagogue, you discuss the contemporary phenomenon of Sippurei Tzaddikim, which tend to be sanitized. You mentioned how stories of Tzaddikim are inspiring and beneficial, especially for children. We wanted your take on the fact that the Torah seems to not hide or sugarcoat the mistakes of our ancestors, while actually making their failures integral to their narrative, even teaching children. In the Torah, if the Torah did not find it beneficial to gloss over the mistakes and flaws of our greatest heroes, why should we employ such thinking today?
So it's a great question. Number one, some of the premises I have issues with. The Torah does hide. The Torah hides a lot of facts. The Torah hides the fact that Esav is, a bad person. Doesn't really talk about that explicitly in the text. The Torah hides why God chose Avraham in general. The Torah, a lot of the disappointments and failures of the Shvatim are dealt with in different ways, the tribes. The Torah does hide. The Torah makes some things explicit, and failure is a very explicit part of the Torah. I believe that the way we should relate to stories of tzaddikim, including biblical forefathers, should mirror the way that we relate to ourselves in our own lives. When you're a young kid and you are raised in a home, and let's say you're in a home with two parents. So we all know, those who grew up in a home with two parents and those who are married know that couples fight. Couples have good days and bad days. Couples, can have moments where they're really struggling. They're really difficult. You don't tell a little kid, mommy and daddy don't always love each other. Mommy and daddy sometimes really do not get along. There's a stability that you want to build a relationship on. And I think that there is a reverence that you want to build your relationship with Torah on. The problem is when you mature and you're an adult now, and now you're getting married and you're building a life and you're looking at yourself in your own mirror, we can't get stuck in our childhood conceptions. And I think sometimes we do get stuck in those conceptions, and we should be able to tell stories that build and cultivate reverence to young children, yet also be able to build upon them and build complexity and depth into who these people were, what their lives were like, and what their struggles were like. I don't like shallow interpretation. That's what I don't like. Nobody wants, if a couple's fighting, to go back to that analogy, you look in the mirror. You don't want, you look in the mirror and use some pop psychology term and diminish yourself to some vogue psychology term, like, oh, that's your Oedipus complex again. You're trying to murder your mother. I don't know. You don't want to throw these terms around in very shallow ways. We are deep, complex people. Every human being is deeply complex. Every relationship is deeply complex. And it needs to be founded on reverence and trust. And once you build that foundation, we should continue building upon it and build more depth and sophistication.
I actually comes to mind. I read once an essay from Rav Lichtenstein. Regarding this phenomenon that you're discussing, regarding as children, we want to build a certain sense of reverence, but then we need to also, like you say, so the question I would have for you is, how do you, to follow up on what you're saying, what are the ways you think that is the right ways to kind of transition that maturity of outlook? How do you go about that? What do we do with that?
Yeah, because also a child, sometimes it feels like the rug was pulled from under them. All of a sudden, they're it's like when you're learning midrash as an adult, and you're like, wait a minute, this is not how we were supposed to be looking at it. There's no explanation, or it's nothing to prepare us for what was the truth. So how do we kind of bridge that gap?
So again, I'm going to come back to the founding analogy. It can't be this, stasis and this calm period, and then you tear the rug out from under them. I think we need to evolve with our language in the same way that we think about ourselves. I talk a lot about mental health and issues of mental health. It's something that I have struggled with for many years, and like many Jewish families, goes back to the Kadmonim, to the earlier generations, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. The first time that my parents sat me down and spoke to me about mental health issues, I remember what grade I was in. I remember the language I was using. I was in 5th grade. And they used specific language and helped integrate me into a world that I've always been a part of, but didn't yet have the language to recognize. I think we get stuck when we teach Medrash. We have beautiful stories, little Midrash says, and we have this imagery, I don't remember all the story, Moshe was 60 feet high, and I don't know, all the stories, all the cutesy stories, and the miracles and the fantastic things that happen. That doesn't mean that all of them were not true. It means that we need to evolve our language of truth and what that means in the religious context. And I think that we're usually get frozen around like 4th grade, like we're just like frozen in time. And I'm trying to think, my son asked me, my son is 6. And he asked me, is Har Sinai real? And I said, yes, of course. Har Sinai is real. It's a real mountain. Then he paused and he looked at me and says, could Har Sinai really talk? Could it really talk? His teacher clearly told him the famous Medrash based on a Gemara. God wanted to pick all the mountains, and they said, pick me. I knew where he was coming from. So what's the right response to that? No, your teacher's a liar. Mountains can't talk. She doesn't know what she's talking about. How do you tell a child that? No, of course I didn't say that. I said, not in the way that you and I can talk, but it represents something. It speaks in a way. It tells us something. Not in the way that me and you speak. It doesn't have a mouth, but it tells us something. That's called evolving language. That's using the same narrative and the same story to bring out a deeper principle. We can't get stuck in a mountains can talk literal meaning, and oftentimes we do. We need to learn how to build upon that. And I think there are a lot of people doing admirable work in this area, but it all relates to that maturation process that we have that is not just about biblical stories, but is about our own self-conception and our own lives.
I love that answer. I really do.
Amazing.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I don't know what either of your names are. One of you is Ben, clearly.
We're
I don't know which
Ben.
one.
Both Ben.
Oh, you're both Ben. It's wonderful.
I'm Benjamin and he's Ben Sion.
I'm Ben Sion. He's Benjamin.
So on the Zoom, you should just cut out who's Koren.
Me.
He's the Koren. I'm the Sioni.
Why put Koren? Just put Ben. You'll see both.
All
Ben
right.
squared.
Love your answer. That was really good.